In May 1942, a French house painter stole the complete, detailed plans for the most fortified section of Hitler's Atlantic Wall, walking out with them hidden behind a mirror. This was no commando operation, but that isn't the most damning detail. The Germans who built that wall never knew those master plans vanished. This true account was deliberately buried until now. Renee Duchez was a house painter and decorator. He was a small, cheerful man in his late 30s. German officers found his clowning amusing. They dismissed him. On May 7, 1942, Duchez accepted a contract. He would repaint interior offices for the organization Tort. This was the German agency running construction on the lower Normandy coast. While on a stepladder, comparing wallpaper samples, an officer left the room. A rolled-up document lay on the desk. Duchez stepped down. He looked. The document was a master plan. It detailed Atlantic Wall fortifications for the entire Cotentin sector. It marked every casemate, every bunker, every underwater obstacle. It even showed dummy minefields meant to deceive. He took it. He hid it behind the same office mirror. He then walked out. Days later, he returned. He claimed he needed to finish the job. He recovered the plan. The plan was carried across France. It was packed with other documents. Colonel Remy himself smuggled it across the channel. He used a small fishing boat named Le Douang. On June 21, 1942, Remy arrived in London. He walked into British intelligence offices. He laid the documents on a desk. The officers who opened them were stunned. Their first concern was German retaliation. They worried the Germans would discover the theft and change the entire defensive plan. The decision was made. They would copy the plan. They would tell no one outside the smallest circle. The Germans never knew it was gone. Over the next 2 years, Duchez's network, the Kane Group of Century, reportedly sent over 3,000 documents to London. All of them concerned the Atlantic Wall. Across France, the wider network grew. It reached thousands of agents. The cost was terrible. Both Century and the Confrérie Notre Dame suffered heavy Gestapo penetration. Large sections of both networks were arrested, shot, or deported. Duchez's wife, Odette, was arrested in November 1943. She was deported to Ravensbrück the following spring. She survived. She returned to France after the war. She lived until March 2005. She outlived nearly everyone who knew what she had done. This hidden effort was vital. It helped answer a question posed by Generalfeldmarschall Geert von Rundstedt in a small office at Wilton Park in Buckinghamshire, sometime in the summer of 1945. A British interrogator asked Rundstedt about the Atlantic Wall. He wanted an honest assessment. Rundstedt, 69 and recovering from a heart attack, was a soldier of 50 years. He had nothing to gain by lying. He called the wall a gigantic bluff from the Scheldt estuary down to the Seine. It had real strength. Below that, into Brittany and toward the Spanish border, was a dreary situation. He said there was nothing at all. To see it for yourself in Normandy, he stated, was to see what rubbish it had been. Then he said something stranger. He said the enemy had probably known more about the wall than the men who built it. He stated it without anger. He was simply describing his conclusion. He had reached it by the spring of 1944. That was more than a year before the war ended. The men trying to break his wall could see it more clearly. The men holding it could not. That should not have been possible. The Atlantic Wall was the largest defensive construction project of the 20th century. It was built by Europe's most security-conscious regime. The Wehrmacht defended it. The Gestapo patrolled it. 17 million cubic meters of concrete went into it. 2 million tons of steel were used. Hundreds of thousands of workers, mostly French civilians and forced laborers under Organisation Tort, spent 4 years pouring it into place. Yet by June 6, 1944, the lieutenants and sergeants landing at Vierville, Colleville, and La Rivière had maps in their pockets. These maps showed German positions. German occupants did not know these positions had been logged. They knew the spacing of beach obstacles down to the foot. They knew the type and field of fire of bunkers no Allied soldier had ever seen. They knew which minefields were real. They knew which were dummies. How a wall stretching from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees came to be better understood by its enemies than its garrison is a story Rundstedt knew well. This disconnect stemmed from a long-running internal German quarrel. It dated back over a century. It was a quarrel about walls. The German army had a long memory about fortified lines. They remembered the Rhine fortresses. They failed against Napoleon. They remembered the collapse of the French Maginot Line in 1940. The heaviest concentration of fixed gun emplacements in Europe was simply bypassed. It was bypassed through the Ardennes forest. Gunners sat in their casemates. They had nothing to shoot at. The German staff drew a clear lesson from these episodes. It went back to Helmuth von Moltke the Elder in the 1860s. Fixed defenses were a trap. They concentrated resources. They told the attacker exactly where to come. They told him where not to come. They almost never held against a serious enemy. That enemy would have the freedom to maneuver. Rundstedt had absorbed that lesson. He entered the army in 1892. He rose through the staff system. By the time Hitler took power in 1933, Rundstedt was a senior general. He held strong views. His views on coastal fortification were orthodox for his generation. You did not stop a serious invasion at a wall. You stopped it in open ground. You used mobile reserves and armor. This happened after the enemy committed. It happened before they consolidated a beachhead. This was the doctrine. It had worked in 2 world wars, but in March 1942, Hitler issued Führer Directive 40. He ordered an unbroken defensive line built. It would run from northern Norway to the Bay of Biscay. Rundstedt knew the doctrine was being violated. He could do little about it. Hitler had personally signed the directive. The directive revealed the wall's original purpose. It spoke of denying the enemy access to the European coast. It spoke of safeguarding sea entrances to protected waterways. It did not speak of defeating an invasion. The wall's job was to slow an enemy down, not to stop him. Joseph Goebbels and the propaganda ministry almost immediately forgot that part. By spring 1943, German newsreels showed staged shots. They displayed huge gun emplacements in Norway and the Pas de Calais. Helmeted soldiers manned them. They knew they were being filmed. The voiceover spoke of an iron ring. Propagandists called it Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. No enemy could ever break it. The reality from Rundstedt's headquarters outside Paris was different. The wall was uneven. The Pas de Calais sector was genuinely formidable. The channel was narrowest there. Every German staff officer expected the invasion there. Other stretches were almost ornamental. The infantry holding the wall was a strange composite. It included older Germans, recovering wounded, and teenagers. It also included Osttruppen Eastern troops. These were Soviet prisoners of war. Mostly Cossacks, Georgians, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, and Turkmens. They were recruited or pressed into German uniform. They were shipped west. They stood on the French coast, pointing rifles at an ocean. By late 1943, 2 organization TOT battalions, on average, were attached to almost every German coastal division. Their German officers did not entirely trust them. The men themselves often did not share a common language. This created a deep structural problem, one the Allies understood and the Germans did not. In late October 1943, Rundstedt completed weeks of personal inspection. He sat down. He wrote a long, blunt memorandum. He sent it through Generalfeldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel to Hitler himself. He described the Atlantic Wall as useful for propaganda. It was useful for briefly delaying an invader, but he argued it could not defeat an invasion by itself. The only hope for a successful defense in the West, he wrote, lay in mobile armored reserves. These reserves would be held inland. They would be ready to counterattack. They would strike the moment the enemy committed to a beach. Rundstedt was making the same argument the German General Staff had made for a century. He argued against the temptation of fixed defenses. Hitler read the report. Hitler told Rundstedt he agreed with him. Then Hitler did the opposite. On November 3, 1943, he issued Führer Directive 51. He named Generalfeldmarschall Erwin Rommel General Inspector of Western Defenses. Rommel reported directly to the High Command in Berlin, not to Rundstedt. Rommel arrived in France around November 10. He spent the winter inspecting. By mid-January 1944, he assumed command of Army Group B. This group controlled the Channel coast itself. Rommel's conclusions were the opposite of Rundstedt's. He had spent 18 months in North Africa. He had experienced Allied air power. He believed armoured reserves could not move during daylight. They would be destroyed from the air. The invasion, Rommel said, had to be stopped on the beach itself. It had to be stopped in the first 24 hours. Otherwise, it would not be stopped at all. Hitler told Rommel he agreed too. The result was a German command in the west. By spring 1944, it had 2 field marshals working at cross purposes. Neither fully controlled the troops he was supposed to command. Both were second-guessed personally by Hitler. Questions arose as small as where to position individual armoured divisions. Rundstedt on paper was Commander-in-Chief West. In practice he had no authority. Not over the navy in his sector, where Admiral Theodor Kranke ran the coastal Kriegsmarine. Not over the Luftwaffe, where Generalfeldmarschall Hugo Spörle ran Luftflotte 3. The Waffen SS units in his theatre answered to Heinrich Himmler. Organization taught, which built the wall, answered to Albert Speer. The OKW Reserve Panzer divisions were the only mobile striking force. They could throw an invasion back into the sea. They could not be released without Hitler's personal authorization. Rundstedt sometimes told visitors, with the dry humor of an old man with nothing left to lose, that the only person he was certain he commanded was the sentry at his headquarters front gate, while German command tied itself in knots. The men who would attack the wall did something else. They took it apart on paper. The first part of that effort began in March 1942. The British Broadcasting Corporation, working with Combined Operations Headquarters in London, made an appeal. It was broadcast over the air. It asked for one strange thing. It asked for old holiday photographs and postcards of the European coast, anything between Norway and the Pyrenees, anything from before the war. The British public sent millions of pictures and cards. They came in shoeboxes and brown paper parcels tied with string. They had handwritten notes attached. A photograph showed a couple on the sand at Lutzer Meer in 1937. A postcard displayed the harbour at Wissant. A snapshot depicted children eating ice cream on the seafront at Viraville. Intelligence officers sorted them by location. They cross-referenced them with French maps. They built a picture by picture. They constructed an image of every beach the Germans were fortifying. They could measure the slope of the sand. They could see how high the seawall was. They could see where access roads descended. They saw where shingle banks rose. In some cases, a postcard taken from one angle matched a German propaganda film unit's later photograph of a new bunker. They could measure how the bunker had altered the original view. It was, in its way, the largest piece of crowdsourced intelligence collection in war history. It cost almost nothing. The Germans never knew it happened. While postcards arrived in London, a far more dangerous reconnaissance began. It started on the other side of the Channel. In summer 1940, days after France fell, Charles de Gaulle appointed a young officer. André de Wavrin, codenamed Colonel Passy, was to build a free French intelligence service. Passy had no agents, no budget, almost no equipment. He had a single conviction. The Allies would eventually return to France. They would need to know what waited for them on the coast. From his small London office, the work was farmed out. A network of ordinary people in occupied France produced the knowledge. The intelligence service became responsible for the Atlantic War. It was called Century. It was the intelligence arm of a larger resistance movement. This was the organization Civile et Militaire, founded in spring 1942. Century's product routed to London. It went through Colonel Remy's older network, the Confrérie. This group had the wireless and courier connections to cross the Channel. The head of Century's section in Normandy was Marcel Girard. The Cain group under him numbered about 40 people. They were not soldiers. There were sailors, fishermen, postmen, and school teachers. A Catholic priest in one village. A hotel keeper's wife in another. They counted German trucks. They noted guard changes at gun emplacements. They walked past construction sites. They counted rebar coming off lorries. They sketched what they saw at night. They used the backs of newspapers. They passed sketches up the chain, by hand, by rail, by fishing boat. Beyond these ground efforts, the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces photographed the wall from above. Reconnaissance Spitfires, stripped of guns and armor, flew north to south along the coast. They flew at heights German fighters could not reach. The film returned to a converted manor house. This was at Medmenham in Buckinghamshire. It was the central interpretation unit of Allied photographic intelligence. By 1944, the station ran with over 1,500 personnel. Roughly 600 were trained photographic interpreters. More than half were women. They worked under stereoscopic viewers. They worked in pairs, around the clock. They could distinguish a real bunker from a wooden decoy. They did it by the shadow it cast at 3:00 in the afternoon. They could tell a freshly poured concrete casemate from an older one. They used the color of disturbed earth around it. By spring 1944, they had identified, located, and classified thousands of individual emplacements. These included gum pits, beach obstacles, radar stations, and field positions. In the final months before the invasion, the most dangerous reconnaissance began. Late in 1943, a young Royal Engineers officer suggested something. Logan Scott Bowden, attached to the Combined Operations Pilotage Parties, proposed someone needed to swim ashore. They needed to swim at proposed invasion beaches. They needed to bring back sand samples. The reason was an engineering question. Planners needed to know if the beaches could carry a 30-ton Sherman tank. They wondered if it could come off a landing craft, or would the tanks sink into clay or peat? Would they become stationary targets? Aerial photographs could not answer this. There was no other way to find out for certain. On December 31, 1943, Scott Bowden and Royal Marine Sergeant Bruce Ogden Smith carried out the first reconnaissance. Operation KJH took them ashore. It was at what would become Gold Beach's eastern end, near Vers-sur-Mer. They returned with samples. Then, on January 17, 1944, they went back. This time, they went in a far more dangerous way. They were carried across the channel. They traveled in the X-20 submarine. This vessel was only 51 feet long, a crew of 5 men crammed into its hull. It was about the size of a small bus. The skipper was Lieutenant Ken Hudspeth. With him was Sub-Lieutenant Bruce Enzer. The SOP commander, Lieutenant Commander Nigel Clogstown Wilmot, and the 2 swimmers. The X-20 took them within 400 yards of what would be Omaha Beach. Scott Bowden and Ogden Smith pulled swimming suits over woolen underwear. They slicked into the water. They moved on hands and knees in the dark. They scooped samples into rubber tubes. They labeled them by location. At one point, Scott Bowden lay flat behind the shingle. He looked up. He saw a single line of footprints ahead. A torch beam appeared at the back of the beach. A German sentry was walking the line. He was less than 200 yards away. Scott Bowden waited. The sentry moved on. He continued his work. He swam back. The X-20 submerged. It went home. The samples reached England. Soil scientists analyzed them. They worked with D-Day planning teams. Crystallographer J.D. Bernal was the senior figure on beach trafficability. The results confirmed something. The proposed American beaches would carry the weight of armor. This single piece of information shaped the entire assault plan for Omaha. Without those rubber tubes from the X-20, the planners would have had to guess. By spring 1944, all these streams of information flowed into a single building. It was in St. James's Square in London. It was called Norfolk House. Cartographers and intelligence officers of SHAEF assembled them. They created a set of maps unlike any maps ever existed. The maps were called Bigot maps. This was after their security classification. The classification was above top secret. Only a few thousand people across the Allied effort could see them. The maps looked, at first glance, like ordinary topographic charts of the Normandy coast. They had roads, towns, contours, and tide markings. These were printed in usual colors, but over the base layer, in colored overprint, every piece of intelligence gathered was marked. It was in tiny, precise notation. The position, type and field of fire of every observed German bunker. Anti-tank ditch around a strong point. Hedgehog space 30 to 35 feet apart, probably mined. Drainage ditch. The water depth at low and high tide. On Omaha Beach alone, more than 200 individual obstacles were marked. They were categorized by type and spacing. The maps were issued in versions and revisions. The surviving Omaha East and Omaha West sheets were drawn at 1,025,000. These were British General Staff Geographical Service Series, sheets 79 and 80. The U.S. 1st Infantry Division would land on these. The beach obstacle overprint editions carried updates. They were as late as May 12 and May 30, 1944. These were only days before the assault. A security failure occurred during Operation Tiger. This was a practice landing off the Devon coast. 10 bigot-cleared officers went missing in the water. Eisenhower personally ordered all 10 bodies recovered. He did this before the invasion could proceed. He could not risk one being captured alive. The result was stark. Eisenhower's planning staff had a more accurate picture of the wall's Normandy sector than the German divisions actually defending it. German engineers received frequent updates. They covered new construction in their own zones. They did not receive systematic, comprehensive updates. They lacked data on fields of fire across battalion boundaries. They missed dead ground between adjoining bunkers. They had no precise obstacle spacing for neighboring sectors. The Allies had all of it. It was on a single sheet. It was kept current by resistance agents, photo interpreters, swimmers, and cartographers. They built a unified picture of the wall. No German general had ever assembled it. Meanwhile, a second Allied operation ran. It was designed not to find German positions, but to make Hitler stare at the wrong ones. It was called Operation Bodyguard. Within it was Operation Fortitude South, run from officers in southern England. Fortitude South created a fictional army group. The 1st United States Army Group comprised 11 divisions. It had 150,000 imaginary men. It was supposedly commanded by General George Patton. He was, at that point, the German Army's most feared American officer. The Phantom Army was given encampments in Kent and Essex. Inflatable rubber tanks appeared in fields. German reconnaissance flights could photograph them. About 250 dummy landing craft, big bobs and wet bobs deployed. They were across southeast English harbours. Constant, deliberately careless radio traffic was generated. Signal companies sent messages between units that did not exist. The story told was consistent. The real invasion would come at the Pas de Calais. This was the shortest crossing point. Whatever happened elsewhere would be a feint. The Germans believed it. They believed it because they wanted to believe it. The Pas de Calais made tactical sense. Also, the most detailed confirmation came from a Spanish national. Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, was on the British payroll. He fed Berlin a steady diet of false reports. He used 27 imaginary sub-agents he invented. Rundstedt, in meetings with Keitel, cited Garbo's reports by name. So did Hitler. The German 15th Army, with up to 19 divisions, sat in the Pas de Calais sector. They waited for weeks after the actual Normandy landings. They waited for an invasion that never came. When the invasion came on June 6, the men on the wall in Normandy met an enemy who already knew the ground. The American Rangers at Pointe du Hoc climbed cliffs at the right place. Aerial photographs had been studied for months. The British landings at Sword and Gold went in along corridors. These had been mapped by resistance agents and by swimmers. They came from the X-20 and X-20 submarines. Even where the German defense was ferocious, as at Omaha, the assault failures were tactical. They were not strategic. The Allies were not surprised by what they found. They had seen most of it already. Almost a year later, the war in Europe ended. Rundstedt was captured at Bad Tölz in Bavaria on May 1, 1945. Men of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division, under Major General John E. Dahlquist, took him. He was 69 years old. He was in poor health. He was recovering from heart trouble. He suffered a second heart attack during early questioning. The interrogation paused. On May 5th, he was brought to U.S. 7th Army Headquarters at Augsburg. He met Lieutenant General Alexander Patch. Then he was flown to Britain. He was held first at the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Centre. This was at Wilton Park. It was a former country estate in Buckinghamshire. British intelligence converted it. Hidden microphones were in many rooms. It was a facility designed to debrief captured senior German officers. Many generals held there did not realize their conversations were recorded. They spoke freely with each other in private. The transcripts of those private conversations run to thousands of pages. They remain among the most candid things any senior German officer ever said. The men involved believed no one outside the room was listening. Rundstedt was also interviewed at length in formal interrogation sessions. Later, military historians questioned him, including Basil Liddell Hart. Liddell Hart's working notes are preserved at King's College London. Other interrogations were conducted by the Historical Section of Canadian Military Headquarters. Charles Stacey led this. It produced its own series of special reports on German commanders. Both streams of records, British and Canadian, sometimes overlap. Both contain Rundstedt at length on the Atlantic War. In those records, the Field Marshal said many things. Some were self-serving. Some were carefully phrased. They aimed to protect the German officer corps' reputation. But on the wall itself, he was direct. This was across transcript after transcript. He used the same handful of phrases, over and over, in slightly different combinations, to different interrogators on different days. Bluff. Propaganda. Rubbish. Defense in depth had been needed. It had not been there. And in one form or another, the sentence that anchors this investigation. He said the enemy had probably known more about the wall than the men who built it. Why was this true? Why could the Allies, working from outside, see it more clearly? They had no access to the wall itself. The Germans had built it brick by brick. The answer is not technical, it is structural. It comes down to one quiet difference. By 1944, the Allies had built an intelligence culture. Information flowed upward and sideways. It moved without political distortion. A photograph taken by a Spitfire pilot over Caen on a Tuesday could be interpreted at Medmenham on a Wednesday. It could be incorporated into a bigot map at Norfolk House on a Thursday. A sketch by a French resistance fisherman could be in a London office 4 days later. A sound sample lifted from the future Omaha beach in mid-January was analysed in a laboratory by month's end. The system worked because its people trusted each other. They shared what they found. They trusted superiors not to punish them for bad news. The Germans had no such system. They had brilliant individual officers. They had superb engineers. They had Organisation Tocht. It could pour concrete faster than almost any construction agency. What they lacked was a culture. It needed to allow bad news to travel honestly upward. A junior engineer reported inadequate wall sectors. He risked being labelled a defeatist. A staff officer pointed out that Osttroppen battalions were unreliable. He risked being asked why he undermined morale. By 1944, German officers wrote honest reports primarily for after the war. They knew what they put in writing while Hitler lived could end their careers. Information about the wall was fragmented. Each sector commander knew his own piece. Todt knew construction. The Navy knew gun batteries. Infantry divisions knew the troops. No one above divisional level had a unified picture. A unified picture would have shown the wall as a whole did not work. The Allies, working from outside, were under no such pressure. They wanted the truth. They built systems to find it. They found it. There is a particular kind of document in British and Canadian archives. It exists in faded carbon copy. These are interrogation transcripts. Rundstedt is asked about Allied air action. His answers are tired. He acknowledges German forces were ill-equipped. He acknowledges they were disorganized on D-Day. He acknowledges the wall was a bluff. He acknowledges the enemy had known it. These are quiet documents. They do not appear in 1945 newsreels. They do not show up in standard memoirs. German generals wrote these later for sale. The war story was retold with dignity. But these quiet documents are there. They are on file. They are what the men actually said. The camera was off. The Atlantic Wall still stands in fragments. It runs along the coasts. Some has fallen into the sea. Some has been swallowed by dunes. Some has been swallowed by dunes. Some is preserved as memorial, especially at the Tot Battery near Cap Gris-Nez and at Lons-sur-Mer in Normandy. 4 casemates and original guns can still be seen there. The bunkers are quiet now. School buses pull up. Children walk through the casemates. They look out through firing slits. They see the grey Channel water, the same water. On June 6, 1944, it was suddenly full of ships. Rundstedt himself was more complicated than post-war memory made him. He was a Prussian aristocrat. He served 3 Kaisers and a Führer. He distrusted Hitler from the beginning. He served him anyway. He testified at Nuremberg. He spoke on subjects he should have known nothing about,